The Forbidden History of the Rowans. They buried 7 kids in a chamber beneath the barn. Autumn mist clings to the rolling hills of Blackwater Valley, Vermont, where time seems to move differently than in the rest of New England. Here, among farms that have been worked by the same families for generations, old stories persist in whispered conversations and warning glances. Some histories, the locals know, are better left undisturbed. Dr. Margaret Sinclair had come to Vermont in the fall of 2018 as part of her research into colonial-era farming practices for the University of Massachusetts. As a historian specializing in 18th and 19th century rural life, she was drawn to Blackwater Valley by its remarkably preserved farmsteads and the wealth of historical documents that local families had maintained for centuries. The Rowan estate, with its 1760s colonial farmhouse and massive weathered barn, represented exactly the kind of historical treasure that made her work meaningful. When elderly Theodore Rowan, the last of his family line, offered to let her examine the property's historical records before donating them to the state archives, she had expected to find the usual collection of farming logs, weather observations, and family correspondence that characterized rural New England. Documentation. She had not expected to uncover evidence of ritual murder spanning 3 generations. The Rowan family had been among the earliest settlers in Blackwater Valley, arriving in 1758 as part of the wave of colonists who pushed into Vermont's wilderness during the French and Indian War. Ezekiel Rowan, the family patriarch, had claimed 400 acres of prime farmland and built the sturdy colonial house that still anchored the property 2.5 centuries later. From the beginning, the Rowans had been different from their neighbors. While other settler families focused on survival and prosperity in the harsh Vermont wilderness, the Rowans seemed driven by darker motivations that set them apart from the close-knit farming community that developed around them. The first hint of the family's true nature appeared in Dr. Sinclair's examination of Ezekiel Rowan's personal journal, written in the careful script of an educated man, but filled with observations that chilled her to the bone. Unlike typical colonial farming records, Ezekiel's writings focused obsessively on what he called the old ways, practices he claimed to have learned from those who came before the church. Ezekiel's journal entries from 1762 described his growing conviction that the land itself demanded specific offerings to maintain its fertility and protect his family from the hardships that claimed so many other colonial settlements. His writings revealed a man who had rejected the Puritan faith of his contemporaries in favor of much older beliefs that he traced back to pre-Christian European traditions. The journal's early entries focused on animal sacrifices and seasonal rituals that Ezekiel performed in secret, always careful to maintain the appearance of Christian piety when interacting with his neighbors. But as Dr. Sinclair read deeper into the chronicle, she discovered that Ezekiel's practices had gradually escalated from animal offerings to something far more sinister. The first mention of human sacrifice appeared in an entry dated October 31st, 1767. The land hungers for more than beast blood. The old ones whisper of children's souls as the sweetest offering, the most powerful gift to ensure the family's continuation through the dark seasons ahead. Dr. Sinclair initially assumed she was reading the ravings of a madman, but subsequent entries provided detailed descriptions of ritual practices that were too specific and consistent to be mere fantasy. Ezekiel had developed an elaborate theology that combined fragments of Celtic paganism, Germanic folk beliefs, and his own twisted interpretations of biblical sacrifice. According to his writings, children were the perfect offering because their souls were unmarked by sin and full of the life force that the old powers craved. He believed that by sacrificing children from other families during specific astronomical events, he could ensure his own bloodlines, prosperity, and protection from disease, crop failure, and the other disasters that regularly claimed colonial families. The journal revealed that Ezekiel had begun his human sacrifices in 1768, targeting children from isolated families whose disappearances could be attributed to wilderness dangers, disease, or Indian raids. His first victim was 8-year-old Mary Henderson, the daughter of a family passing through the valley on their way to settlements further north. Ezekiel's description of Mary's death was methodical and horrifyingly detailed. He had lured her away from her family's camp with promises of fresh bread, then brought her to a specially constructed chamber beneath his barn, where he performed what he called the old ritual of renewal. The child's death, according to his journal, had been preceded by days of ceremony designed to prepare her soul for its sacred journey. The underground chamber, Ezekiel wrote, had been excavated during the barn's construction and designed specifically for his ritual purposes. Built with stone walls and a carefully engineered drainage system, it was intended to be both a place of sacrifice and a final resting place for his victims. Over the next 15 years, Ezekiel's journal documented 6 more child sacrifices, each performed during significant dates in his personal calendar of pagan observances. His victims ranged in age from 6 to 12 and included both boys and girls from families that had the misfortune to cross paths with the Rowan patriarch during his hunting seasons. The journal entries describing these murders revealed a man who had convinced himself that his actions were not only justified but necessary for the survival of his family and the prosperity of his land. He wrote about each sacrifice with the detached precision of a farmer describing the slaughter of livestock, showing no recognition of the horror he was inflicting on innocent children and their families. What made Ezekiel's crimes even more disturbing was the evidence that his family had been complicit in his actions. References throughout the journal indicated that his wife, Patience, and their 3 adult sons had participated in both the rituals and the cover-up activities that followed. Each murder, the Rowan family's involvement in their patriarch's crimes extended beyond simple complicity. Ezekiel's writings revealed that he had been training his sons in what he called the family obligation, the continuation of ritual sacrifice as a sacred duty that would be passed down through generations to ensure the family's continued prosperity. When Ezekiel died in 1784, his eldest son Jeremiah inherited both the family farm and the terrible tradition that came with it. Dr. Sinclair's examination of subsequent family documents revealed that the ritual murders had continued under Jeremiah's leadership, then passed to his son Cornelius, creating a cycle of horror that spanned 3 generations and claimed at least 21 young lives. The documentation of the family's crimes was preserved in meticulous detail across multiple journals and record books that had been carefully maintained and hidden by each generation of Rowans. These materials revealed not only the scope of their murders, but also the sophisticated methods they had developed for selecting victims, covering their tracks, and maintaining their respectable facade within the local community. The Rowans had developed a reputation as a prosperous but reclusive family whose success seemed almost supernatural compared to their struggling neighbors. While other farms failed during harsh winters or crop blights, the Rowan estate continued to thrive, leading to whispered speculation about their methods, but never open suspicion of their true activities. The family's wealth had grown substantially over the decades, partly through legitimate farming success, but also through the belongings of their victims, which they had systematically looted and sold in distant markets where the items wouldn't be recognized. This additional income had allowed them to expand their property and increase their social standing within the region. Dr. Sinclair's discovery of the Rowan family's crimes was complicated by the realization that local legends and folklore had preserved fragments of the truth for over 2 centuries. Elderly residents of Blackwater Valley still told stories about children who had vanished near the Rowan property, about strange lights and sounds emanating from the barn during certain seasons, and about the family's unnaturally consistent good fortune. These stories, dismissed by most as rural superstition, had apparently served as a form of collective memory that kept awareness of the family's dark history alive. Even when official records and investigations had failed to uncover the truth, the local reluctance to discuss the Rowan family, which Dr. Sinclair had initially attributed to typical New England reserve, now seemed like a community-wide acknowledgement of something too terrible to speak about directly. The chamber beneath the barn, according to Ezekiel's detailed descriptions, had been designed not only as a place of murder, but as a permanent repository for his victims' remains. His writings indicated that the 7 children killed during his lifetime had been buried within the chamber, according to specific ritual requirements that he believed would bind their souls to the land and continue to provide spiritual protection for his descendants. As Dr. Sinclair reached the end of Ezekiel's journal and began examining the records left by his successors, she realized that she had uncovered not just historical crimes, but potentially ongoing evidence that would require immediate attention from law enforcement authorities. The chamber, described in such detail by 3 generations of Rowan patriarchs, still existed beneath the barn, and if the family's records were accurate, it contained the remains of 7 children who had been missing for over 2 centuries. The weight of her discovery settled on Dr. Sinclair as she sat in the Rowan farmhouse kitchen, surrounded by documents that revealed one of the most systematic and long-lasting serial killing operations in American history. The cheerful autumn afternoon outside seemed to mock the horror contained in the carefully preserved records that detailed decades of ritualized child murder. As Chapter 1 of this investigation concluded, Dr. Sinclair faced the realization that her academic research had stumbled upon evidence of crimes that demanded justice, even across the span of centuries. The forbidden history of the Rowan family was about to emerge from the shadows where it had hidden for generations, and the 7 children buried beneath the barn were finally going to receive the recognition and proper burial that had been denied to them for over 200 years. Dr. Margaret Sinclair's decision to contact Vermont State Police in November 2018 marked the beginning of an investigation that would challenge everything historians and law enforcement officials thought they knew about colonial-era crime and the persistence of evidence across centuries. Detective Sarah Chen, who had worked numerous cold cases during her 15-year career with the Vermont State Police, found herself confronting a situation unlike anything in her professional experience. The meticulous documentation provided by Dr. Sinclair described crimes that had occurred before the United States existed as a nation, committed by perpetrators who had been dead for over 2 centuries. The legal and practical challenges of investigating murders from the 1760s and 1770s were unprecedented, but the detailed nature of the Rowan family records and the specific location of the alleged burial site made this more than a historical curiosity. If the documents were accurate, there were human remains beneath the Rowan barn that deserved proper identification and burial, regardless of how much time had passed. The initial ground-penetrating radar survey of the barn area, conducted in December 2018, revealed unmistakable evidence of a large underground chamber exactly where Ezekiel Rowan's journal had indicated it would be found. The chamber's dimensions and construction matched his descriptions so precisely that any doubt about the accuracy of his records was immediately eliminated. Dr. Amanda Foster, Vermont's chief forensic anthropologist, joined the investigation as plans were made for the careful excavation of what was potentially one of the oldest crime scenes in American law enforcement history. The challenge of preserving evidence and maintaining scientific integrity while investigating crimes from the colonial period required the development of entirely new protocols. The excavation of the chamber beneath the Rowan barn began in March 2019. As soon as weather conditions permitted, the delicate work required to preserve both historical evidence and any human remains that might be recovered. What the team discovered exceeded even their most detailed expectations based on the Rowan family records. The underground chamber was a masterpiece of colonial-era construction, built with precisely fitted stone blocks and designed with drainage systems that had preserved its contents for over 2.5 centuries. The chamber measured 20 feet by 30 feet, with a vaulted ceiling that rose 12 feet above a carefully laid stone floor. More shocking than the chamber's construction was the evidence it contained of systematic ritual murder spanning multiple generations. The space had been divided into distinct areas for different aspects of the Rowan family's murderous ceremonies, with elaborate stone altars, drainage channels for blood, and carefully prepared burial niches where victims' remains had been interred, according to specific ritual requirements. The forensic team's examination of the chamber revealed 7 distinct burial sites, each containing the skeletal remains of children ranging in age from approximately 6 to 12 years old. The preservation of the remains was remarkable, aided by the chamber's controlled environment and the specific burial practices described in the Rowan family journals. Dr. Foster's analysis of the skeletal evidence provided tragic confirmation of the details recorded in Ezekiel Rowan's writings. Each set of remains showed evidence of the specific methods of murder he had described, including deliberate cuts and breaks that matched his ritual requirements. The positioning of the bodies and the artifacts buried with them corresponded exactly to his documented procedures. Perhaps most disturbing was the evidence that the ritual murders had continued beyond Ezekiel's death, as suggested by the family records Dr. Sinclair had discovered. While 7 children had been buried in the original chamber during Ezekiel's lifetime, additional evidence suggested that subsequent generations of Rowans had expanded their operations to include burial sites in other locations on the property. The investigation expanded beyond the original chamber as ground-penetrating radar revealed additional underground anomalies scattered across the Rowan property. Each new discovery provided further confirmation that the family's ritual murder operation had been far more extensive than even their detailed records had indicated. The forensic team's work was complicated by the challenge of identifying victims whose disappearances had never been properly investigated or documented. Colonial era record-keeping was spotty at best, and the Rowans had specifically targeted children from transient families whose absence wouldn't be immediately noticed or thoroughly investigated. Working with genealogical researchers and historical records specialists, the team was able to identify 3 of the 7 children found in the original chamber. 8-year-old Mary Henderson, whose disappearance in 1768 had been the first murder documented in Ezekiel's journal, was identified through dental remains and artifacts buried with her body that matched descriptions in her family's surviving correspondence. The identification of other victims required more complex forensic work, including isotope analysis to determine their geographic origins and comparative studies of skeletal development patterns from the colonial period. Each identification provided closure for family lines that had wondered about missing ancestors for over 2 centuries. The psychological profile of the Rowan family killers, developed by Dr. James Morrison, revealed patterns that challenged conventional understanding of serial murder and family-based violence. Unlike modern serial killers who typically operate alone and in secret, the Rowans had created a multi-generational killing operation that was integrated into their family identity and economic success. The ritualistic nature of their murders, combined with their apparent sincere belief in the spiritual benefits of child sacrifice, placed them in a unique category of family-based cult behavior that had operated successfully for decades in a small, close-knit community. Their ability to maintain their crimes while presenting a facade of prosperity and respectability demonstrated sophisticated psychological manipulation and social control. The investigation revealed that the Rowan family's influence in Blackwater Valley had extended far beyond their immediate property. Bank records and business documents from the 19th century showed that they had gradually acquired substantial holdings throughout the region, often from families who had experienced mysterious tragedies or unexplained disappearances of children. This pattern suggested that the family's ritual murder operation had served multiple purposes, providing them with victims for their ceremonies, eliminating potential witnesses to their activities, and creating opportunities to acquire property from grieving families at below-market prices. Their crimes had been not only ritualistic, but economically motivated, combining religious fanaticism with calculated greed. The community impact of the Rowan revelations was profound and complex. Many longtime residents of Blackwater Valley found that family stories and local legends they had grown up with suddenly took on new and horrifying meaning. Stories about children who had vanished, about the Rowan family's unusual prosperity, and about strange occurrences near their property were now understood as fragments of suppressed collective memory about real crimes. The psychological effect on the community was particularly intense for families who discovered that their ancestors had been among the Rowan victims. The revelation that their family histories included not just early death, but ritualistic murder, created trauma that extended across generations and required specialized counseling support. Theodore Rowan, the elderly descendant who had unknowingly provided Dr. Sinclair with access to his family's incriminating records, was devastated by the discovery of his ancestors' crimes. At 87 years old, he had lived his entire life believing he was the descendant of successful farmers, only to learn that his family's prosperity had been built on the systematic murder of children. Theodore's cooperation with investigators was crucial to understanding the full scope of his family's crimes and locating additional burial sites on the property. His knowledge of family traditions and property modifications provided context for evidence that might otherwise have been missed or misinterpreted. The legal implications of the Rowan case were complex and unprecedented. While the perpetrators had been dead for over 2 centuries, making prosecution impossible, the discovery of their crimes raised important questions about property rights, historical justice, and the responsibility of society to address historical atrocities. The Rowan property was eventually transferred to the state of Vermont, which converted it into a memorial site dedicated to the victims of historical family violence. The chamber beneath the barn was preserved as a historical exhibit, while the remains of the 7 identified children were given proper burial in the Blackwater Valley Cemetery after extensive consultation with descendant families and religious authorities. The investigation prompted legislative changes in Vermont and several other states, establishing new protocols for handling historical crime scenes and creating better mechanisms for preserving and investigating evidence of historical atrocities. The case demonstrated that justice could be served even across centuries through proper recognition, memorialization, and education about historical crimes. Dr. Sinclair's research, which had begun as an academic study of colonial farming practices, ultimately resulted in a comprehensive historical analysis of family-based serial murder that has informed understanding of similar cases across American history. Her work demonstrated the importance of preserving historical documents and taking seriously local legends and folklore that might contain fragments of suppressed truth. The forbidden history of the Rowan family serves as a disturbing reminder that evil can hide behind facades of prosperity and respectability for generations, and that the truth has a way of eventually emerging, even when it has been buried for centuries. Their story demonstrates the importance of maintaining vigilance for signs of family-based violence and the need to listen to community voices that might be trying to preserve dangerous truths. Today, the 7 children who were murdered and buried beneath the Rowan barn have finally received the recognition and proper burial that was denied to them for over 200 years. Their story serves as a memorial to all victims of family-based violence and a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still be meaningful even across the span of centuries. The weathered barn that concealed their suffering for so long now stands as a monument to their memory and a testament to the importance of confronting historical atrocities rather than allowing them to remain buried in silence. The past, as the Rowan case demonstrates, never truly stays buried. It simply waits for someone brave enough to uncover the truth and give voice to those who were silenced by violence and fear.
Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,